Welcome back for another episode of Dave's Desk Bible Basics. Today we're looking at the letters of John. So we're going to look at all three, 1 John, 2 John and 3 John, all in one video, but mostly just at 1 John, don't panic. So these letters all written by John, who wrote the Gospel of John, who we'll see wrote the book of Revelation. There's no name in the letters, so the understanding that John wrote them comes from the early church fathers, guys like with names like Irenaeus and Clement. So the people who led the church in the early centuries all believed it was John's. No one has ever been named apart from John. The writing is very similar to that used in John's Gospel, uses similar themes, similar language, similar phrasing, speaks as if an eyewitness account, and assumes the authority, and also it seems like it's written by someone who's old enough to be John at the time this letter was probably written. He refers to the believers as children, which probably I, as someone who's not yet 40, wouldn't refer to other believers as children without seemingly being incredibly patronising. But if I was in my 80s or 90s, I might well do. So it's understood that it's probably written by John between 85 and 95, so sometime between writing the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. At this time, John is understood to have been in the area around that we now call Turkey, and it's written to those churches in the region as a sort of a circular read this and pass it on type thing. And probably 2nd John and 3rd John were all carried around at the same time. So you got all three at once, but we'll look slightly more at that towards the end. And 1 John deals with heresy, and so we're just going to talk a little bit about what that heresy was in order to better understand it, partly because it comes up in this letter, but also several of the New Testament books are actually dealing with this thing that will become known as Gnosticism, but it's spelt with a silent G, so if you're reading it and you've never heard it said, it's Gnosticism, but it's just Gnosticism. Gnostic is the Greek word for knowledge. See, they have a silent G, we have a silent K, all language is messed up. And Gnostic belief will go on to be like a fairly structured belief system, but at its core it believes that the spirit is good and matter is evil. So human beings are, to the extent that they're physical, are bad, and to the extent that they're spiritual are good. God is only spiritual, so God is purely good, and salvation therefore comes from escaping the physical and becoming only spiritual, and that is achieved by some secret knowledge, thus Gnosticism as the name. And so they believe some fairly obviously heretical things. They believe that Jesus wasn't fully God and fully human, so he was fully God, but he wasn't fully human. So either Jesus made it look like he had a body when actually he was only spirit, and some of them believed. Others believed that Jesus was a spiritual being that inhabited a human from the baptism until just before the crucifixion, escaping the body just before death on the cross. Hugely problematic in terms of what the Bible actually teaches about the nature of our salvation through Jesus' death and resurrection, the fact that he is fully God and fully human. And also this had some fairly negative outcomes in terms of behaviour. So for some Gnostics, they believed that the body needed to be beaten into submission because it was physical and therefore evil and therefore needed to be beaten. Others said, well, seeing as this body is evil and it's matter that is by its existence evil, whether or not it breaks the law or not doesn't really matter because it's already evil, and therefore I can do what I like with my body because that doesn't affect my spirit because that is good. And so they lived a very licentious existence. And it seems that John is writing to a church that's coming up against the beginnings of this belief that Jesus wasn't fully God, wasn't fully human, that we could do what we like because we were saved through becoming freed from our physical form, and therefore John is teaching into this sort of void of understanding. And so John refutes these false claims by assuring the believers that they are saved. Imagine someone has taught you that you're saved, and then someone else turns up and says, "Oh, you're not saved without this secret knowledge," it might sow doubt. So John is saying, no, you are saved through faith in Jesus. That is what gets, that is it. That's all there is. There's no secret knowledge that is needed. He reassures them of their salvation. And he then speaks as an eyewitness. This is someone who's known what it is to walk with Jesus all the way through, to have seen him on the cross, to have stood there at the cross and known that the person dying on the cross was the same person who was performing those miracles. And so he speaks of Jesus' divinity, of his authority, of his humanity. And he tells them what it means to be a true and faithful believer, someone who believes that Jesus is fully God and fully human, that he is the Son of God, someone who obeys Jesus' teaching. Jesus said, don't disrespect the law because of grace. We'll talk about more about that in other videos. And someone who loves their brothers and sisters in Christ. You can't go around dismantling someone else's trust in the grace of God in order to make ourselves more powerful. That isn't love. And encourage you to go on and read chapter 1 John 3 11 to 24. Thinking about love and persecution, the actions, obedience and hope that are reflected in that passage. Before we go though, just a note on 2 John and 3 John. 2 John is a letter that accompanies 1 John, and it's basically saying don't host false teachers. So as this letter is going around, so there would have been teachers that would have gone around from town to town and relied on people to put them in their homes and to look after them. And John is saying, if these people aren't teaching Jesus faithfully, don't host them. Just let them walk on to another place. And similarly, third letter of John, 3 John, is writing to these two different households, one who has hosted faithful teachers and one who's rejected hosting faithful teachers, and say, no, look, you need to look after the good teachers, people who come around bringing you a good word. You need to host them. And I think that there's a challenge there for us to think about how we make space for good teaching in our lives, how we welcome good teachers in, and how we're discerning and saying, actually, no, what you're sharing with us isn't good, and we need to ask you to move on. I hope you found that helpful and you don't feel shortchanged on the second and third letters of John, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.